Hi, everyone. This is Andrew, just coming back to the podcast and getting back in touch with everyone. I hope everyone's been well, had a good Thanksgiving in the last few months. As our listeners, regular listeners especially, will know that we haven't had a episode on this podcast in a few months. I had decided to take a break from the podcast. The podcast, of course, has been going since the year 2020, about twice a month, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so it was a time in my life and ministry where some other things at the time demanded some more attention, and myself, I just needed kind of a refresher, or I guess sabbatical, if you will, from podcasting. But glad to be back, and we'll be back on the regular schedule of a couple episodes per month. I did just record in addition to this, I just got done recording an episode with our co-host James that, everyone knows, and with a guest, the Reverend Ben Randall, talking about a new book he wrote called Introducing Anglicanism, a Catechism on the 39 Articles. And so that episode is already finished, but it'll be released later this month of December. And so we have that to look forward, or you have that to look forward to. But I just wanted to do a kind of a solo episode. I don't do a lot of these, but just wanted to do one. I don't intend this episode to be very long, but I wanted to just share some of my thoughts on the movie Bonhoeffer. As probably a lot of you listening may know, there was a recent movie based on this Christian figure, a faith-based movie, if you will. I mean, it came out from Angel Studios, which normally makes faith-based movies, and so a lot of Christians and a lot of people in the churches today may have caught notice of this recent movie about the Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor who lived during World War II and stood up against the Nazi regime, and tried to call the churches and fellow Christians, especially in Germany, to stand up to Hitler as well. So I just wanted to share some of my thoughts on it, because the movie did generate a lot of well, not a lot, I would say, but a bit of controversy. Due to some reasons I'll get into, and for reasons, and I thought it was criticized and panned on some levels that I personally thought were unfair, having had seen the movie myself. It is not a perfect movie by any means. I don't know, most movies are not. The Godfather Part 2 is a perfect movie. The movie North by Northwest, the old Hitchcock movie with Cary Grant, that's a perfect movie. But there's, not a lot of movies I would call, perfect. Those are reserved, me, I'm kind of a movie buff myself. A small minority of movies do I give 5 out of 5 stars. So in this movie, Bonhoeffer was definitely not a 5 of 5, I would say. But it was a good movie, and I thought it was very moving. I just went to see it 2 weeks ago. At the time I'm recording this, and I went with a group of parishioners from my church, actually pretty large group. Surprised we went to like a matinee showing and had over 20 people join me, and we had kind of the screening room to ourselves almost. And I got a lot of feedback and comments from people after, saying how they really were moved by the film. That we didn't want to. None of us really wanted to say we enjoyed the film, because it's kind of like you don't go to the Anne Frank Museum or a Holocaust museum to enjoy it. That's just not the right word. But because it's important that we know that story, that we know that history, I think, and so this movie was very much had that a similar effect. It's sad, but also joy to be found in a way because of just the how inspiring people like Bonhoeffer and many people throughout the history of the church are to us today, even if they lived in difficult circumstances and faced tragic things. And so I just wanted to give kind of my review. I had posted on my own social media, my Facebook account, I posted, because I have friends on there who follow me, and I have, parishioners on there who follow me. So I wanted to put up, I shared some of my thoughts initially. I just threw a Facebook post on it, and got some good engagement through there. And overall, I think people understood where I was coming from. But a lot of this review, it wasn't so much a review of the movie, more so as just stating that I liked it, and I didn't see where some of the criticisms that were coming from certain corners. How I saw that some of these criticisms were just not, I felt, well founded, and maybe a bit premature. But I'll get into that in a moment. So, again, Doth Protest is back on. This podcast, we're back on for here in December. We're in the season of Advent, awaiting Christmas, and we'll be back with our normal schedule of a couple episodes per month. And so, thanks for tuning in. And if we encourage you to follow us on Instagram, tends to be where we're most active, but also we have a Facebook page. And we have, of course, you can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, iHeart, and a variety, pretty much most streaming platforms out there. We're also on YouTube. We don't have video podcasts, but we do put the podcast, the episodes on there to listen to, and the video just shows our cover art for the podcast. And so, glad to have everyone back. My initial thoughts, I guess I'll just start off with this. As I said, I watched it a couple weeks ago, and like I said, I thought Bonhoeffer was a good film. And of course, the full title of this movie, and it was released in 2024. It's called Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, Assassin. So the subtitle is Pastor, Spy, Assassin, rated PG-13, runs over a little over a couple hours. I'm just pulling it up online right now. It has a 7 out of 10 at IMDb, that's Internet Movie Database. That's actually a pretty good rating for IMDb. Rotten Tomatoes is a 63%, which I would say 63% positive reviews. I'm not going to go into it, and I mean, you can go there yourself and look. I mean, I don't know if that's popular or critic reviews. 63% is I would say a generally good, favorable review for a movie, maybe a little bit above average, and that's what I felt it was. I mean, if I were to give it, I would give it maybe a 3.5 out of 5 stars. People might be, oh, that's not that high. Well, actually, it is. I mean, it's three. I would say 3 out of 5. I would say is a good movie. I know I'm starting to sound like a movie snob, or I'm no movie critic. I will say that, but I would say 4 is like a very, 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 very good movie, and 4.5 almost perfect. 3.5 is definitely like, yeah, this is a good movie, worth seeing, above average. I thought the movie was better than, I expected. Of course, I think sometimes when I think religious films in general can be so hit or miss, and I think when movies tackle a sensitive topic, whether religious or not, when movies tackle a sensitive topic or a person of controversy, that can be hit or miss as well. And so you never kind of know what to expect. And I think this time this movie came out on the good side. I'm like, okay, this is overall a well done movie. And there's been a couple other films I know made on Bonhoeffer in the past. I think they were both kind of they weren't as big as this one. I think the one was a TV movie 20 years ago, and there's been some documentaries. But this is, I think, the first kind of feature film attempt of making Bonhoeffer's story into a movie. And so like I said, overall good movie. And like I said, honestly better than I thought it would be. I think it could have been maybe 15, 20 minutes shorter. It does run at 2 hours and 12 minutes. I think they could have trimmed some time off it. There were some kind of just longer scenes of dialogue that could have been done shorter. There's parts of the movie that are the pacing could have been better, and there's parts where there's really no action goes on at all, and so you kind of get like, okay, what's next? Waiting for the next thing, and maybe you get bored a little bit. And those are the reasons why I gave it that brought it down to a 3.5, I guess. But overall, it was a good movie. They could have tweaked some things to make it better. But here I am again. I'm no film critic. I know nothing about filmmaking other than I like movies, so like a lot of people do. And so those are my thoughts on the movie as a movie. And I do think it's important. I know this treated a historical topic. It treated a real person who actually lived. But I think it's good to tackle movies in their own, assess movies as in their own rights as creative pieces, try to bracket out, if there's historical inaccuracies and stuff. One part of how we see a movie like that, we need to bracket that out for a moment and just, judge a movie by its movie merits, or I guess its cinematic merits. And I think some of the harsh critics of this movie, I don't think really did that. And we'll see some of the critics were more like historians and scholars, and not really like film critics, so that's kind of as a movie buff, and that's how I see it. Just to kind of maybe a silly example, I love the movie Braveheart. It is one of the most historically inaccurate films. You get any scholar who is an expert on William Wallace or the Scottish Wars of Independence, they will tell you how badly done, quote unquote, that movie is, in the sense that it's so historically inaccurate. And I would agree with that, but I would also say, in itself as a movie, it's really, really, really good. I mean, at this point, it's a classic, I guess. Gosh, as I'm recording this, I think that movie came out in maybe 1994. That's a 30-year-old movie, so hard to believe. But anyways, so yeah, that's my thoughts on historical films. It's like, yeah, we should strive for accuracy, but also is that everything cinematic liberties are given. But I digress. So back to Bonhoeffer, I came across criticisms of this film ranging from, like we said, pointing out historical inaccuracies to some panning it as a propagandic movie. Specifically, there were critics calling it a propaganda movie for Christian nationalism, or a movie that was contained a right wing Christian nationalist message. And I think we even need to break down what we mean by Christian nationalism, because I think in the current political zeitgeist, I've been seeing that word used a lot. And people are using that word, accusing others of being Christian nationalists, and I don't. Many times in ways that I think that are just off, and I think that term Christian nationalism, we kind of have to break that down. And I'll get into that in a little bit, but I'm just going to say, after seeing the movie, I did not see anything in that movie that can reasonably be construed to be preaching Christian nationalism. In fact, it definitely preaches against nationalism, and it definitely preaches against a type of absolutist, jingoistic, love for one's country that makes your country an idol over the living God. So it definitely preaches against nationalism generally. So that, and it's when I think it has takes a lot of intention in that emphasis, and so I think just given that, it's hard for me to try to see how it was also preaching another kind of nationalism. I just didn't see that. But now, as far as the historical inaccuracies go, there were certainly some, and there's no intended spoilers here in this episode. I don't intend to spoil anything about the movie. Some of these might be interpreted as spoilers, but I'm really trying not to. So just that warning for y'all. I do think, I will say, it's fitting for historians to do their jobs whenever a movie made about a person who actually lived. so they can. Yeah, I think it's important to historians to separate fact from fiction, because a lot of these movies. I mean, Braveheart's maybe a crazy example, but even the movie Braveheart is wildly historically inaccurate as it was. Maybe served a good purpose is that it got people interested in William Wallace and Robert the Bruce, and they went and read more on their own, and they really discovered something they were really interested in, like the Scottish War of Independence. Wow, that's very interesting. I'm glad I saw that movie Braveheart. I realized there were lots of things wrong about it, but I'm so glad I did because it got me into this, right? So I don't think that's a bad thing personally, that movies can have that effect even if they're way off in the historical details. Um, Movies taking cinematic licenses in how they adapt a an event or a biography of someone to the screen, it's nothing new. I mean, and I did think like I don't know, maybe this is unfair for me to say, but I did feel like the critics, some of the people who were criticizing Bonhoeffer on this front, the movie Bonhoeffer on this front, were would they do the same for other movies they like that are based on historical things that also contained inaccuracies? I wonder. I wonder if their criticisms could have been, in fact, ideologically driven themselves. But I don't know. Maybe it's unfair of me to go that far. But I do understand that sticking to the facts and striving to stick to the facts and accuracy is a good thing. We should be sensitive to the fact of treating history right. I think, especially for people like Bonhoeffer, who have had not so distant relatives or descendants who may be still living. He definitely does have relatives still living. It's worth trying to get things right, especially in how we portray the person. So, but as far as this Bonhoeffer movie goes, I didn't see how any of the liberties that the filmmakers did take. I didn't see how any of those liberties dishonored him, even if they were a little off. I think they were. I think there were things, and these are potential spoilers. I liked some of the things they put in there that probably didn't happen. Like, for instance, the when Bonhoeffer's in Harlem, because he spent some time studying in the States, and he came and saw the States in the early 30s, saw racism up front and stuff. I mean, that's real stuff that happened. But they show him really, because Bonhoeffer was a piano player, they show him in the movie going to a jazz club with his friend in Harlem. And this would have been, historically, that would have been at the height of early 30s, was at the height of jazz in many ways, up through into the 40s. And it shows Bonhoeffer kind of having I don't know, a jam session. I don't know, playing piano in the club with the fellow with the club band, with the house band, and it's just a fun scene, and kind of heartwarming too, because it's like shows like breaking down racial barriers. Did that happen? Don't know. I mean, maybe not. And again, I will say, and I should have said this in the beginning. I'm going to pause here. I've not. I am perhaps shamefully underread on Bonhoeffer. Now, as far as I've read the key works, Cost of Discipleship, ethics, and currently just started the Letters from Prison. It's some of his chief works I've read over the years. I have not intensely studied him like I have for theologians who were definitely in his orbit. I mean, a lot of my, and this is why I'm shamefully not read much Bonhoeffer's. I think I should have. A lot of my academic work has been in the study of churches of Bonhoeffer's day, churches in Germany in the interwar period and in the rise of Hitler, and how the churches responded to that. And spent a lot of time on like Paul Althaus and Karl Barth, and not as much, but a bit more on Rudolf Bultmann, all people who were who all knew Bonhoeffer, and all who addressed the Nazi Germany situation in their own way. And so they're all people in this in this story, you could say. And so, but as far as Bonhoeffer goes, I have not really read a lot of secondary sources about him, or at least not a lot of scholarly works that were devoted to him. I have a couple on my shelves that I've been meaning to get to, have not yet. But and again, having seen this movie, whatever people want to think about it, it has inspired me to read more. I'm now reading Charles Marsh's biography of Bonhoeffer. I don't think I'm going to read the Metexas one. I'll get into that, but I'm reading Charles Marsh's book on Bonhoeffer, which, by the way, is called "Strange Glory: A Life of Dietrich Bonhoeffer," and so written about maybe 10 years ago. It's very well done. Definitely shows, especially if you want to get more of Bonhoeffer's theology and his theological development, written in a way that's weaved into his personal biography, and in a way that's, I think, a fairly accessible read as well. Haven't finished the book, but so far, about maybe a third of the way through, I'd recommend it. But again, going back to things that may or may not have happened, yeah, he probably didn't play jazz in the jazz club. His involvement with plots to kill Hitler, I think this was the big thing, which we'll revisit in a little bit. How direct was he in an involvement to take down Adolf Hitler? Well, he was definitely, he wasn't sitting on the sidelines. Well, we know he wasn't quiet and he wasn't complicit with Hitler. And he wasn't just sitting on the sidelines giving an occasional, vocal proclamation against Hitler, though he did a lot of proclamation against Hitler. He was actively involved with saving people from Hitler. The movie does depict him taking Jewish people to refuge in Switzerland. That things like that. He was involved. He was associated with people that were involved ultimately in plots to take Hitler down. Yes, that means assassination. Now, there's been a debate in the past 10 years on the popular level, from what I've gathered, and on the scholarly level, of people disagreeing how involved he was. The people that want to maintain this kind of like pacifist image of Dietrich refuse to say that, will not go as far as to say that he took part. Now, the reason why he ended up in a camp, yes, is because he was accused of taking part in an assassination attempt. But these interpreters would say, well, he actually wasn't really involved with he was associated with in this wider, broad circle of resistance against Nazis, but he was not involved directly, nor would he have wanted to be, nor to actually assassinate Hitler. And another narrative that says, well, I don't think that's quite the case. He would have recognized this is very ethically complicated, but he would have, been about Hitler. He would have believed that Hitler needed to be taken down, and so that's the debate right now. Again, I don't have a verdict of my own on this. If I'm to read more biography of him, maybe even just this book by Marsh, maybe I'll come to my own conclusion about that, and maybe I'll get back with you all about what I think about that. I think either way, though, the way this movie goes with the interpretation, and it's not really until the very end of the movie that he does believe Hitler needs to be taken down, but it's presented in such a way where it's like, I didn't see it as it didn't show Bonhoeffer as a militant. I will say that it showed him, if anything, as a reluctant militant in that regard. And so again, some of the critics who've said, or the criticizers, they're not really movie critics, but the people who've criticized this movie, saying that it made him into some type of like violent, or that it like celebrates him as portrays him as a violent figure, Bonhoeffer. I don't know if I can. I'm not quite. I just don't see that. So and another thing in the movie, and this has been pointed out, was that it didn't really get into the weeds of his theology. But at the same time, it's a movie. I don't know if movies can really do that. I mean, it's there's I think maybe people are so moved to read Bonhoeffer's own writings from seeing a movie like this, Again, that's a good thing, and then that's an opportunity for them to get into the theology. Now, not that isn't to say theology is just some abstract thing that has no bearing on someone's life and how they live it. Obviously, you've heard me on this podcast. I'm all about the importance of theology, and I'm all about the church, caring about theology and caring about it more because many times it hasn't. I think the movie doesn't. To the movie's credit, I think they do at least in very small digestible bits do show a theological Bonhoeffer in the sense that of him seeing how the church of the state churches of Germany are not or inconsistent with the God of the Bible. So, you mean that in itself is a type of theological argument shown in the movie, but also, yeah, I think again, I just think listeners should just or listeners, well, people should just see this movie and see what they think of it. So from what I could tell, the Christian nationalist accusations, and let me kind of, I was about to get into why I thought those accusations of the movie being Christian nationalists weren't fair, but I'm just going to go ahead and just touch on Christian nationalism for a bit, because that's like, it's a big word. Well, it's two words, but I've been seeing it kind of, especially in our current kind of divided times politically, and we just had an election here where I am in the United States, and between two people that a lot of people don't like one of them, and a lot of other people don't like the other, and there's I've been seeing people from one of the groups seeing anything that's remotely like Christian, anything, whether it's a movie or whatever, any type of Christian thing in the public square that isn't some, type of progressive Christian variety, like a James Martin, anything to the right of him is like, I guess, Christian nationalist. It seems to me, anyways, and I, I would just caution against just using that terminology to describe, you know, a lot of things that people are using that term to describe. Maybe I should just start with Metax. So the reason why this movie was accused of being Christian nationalist was because there were people who were associating this movie with a very popular biography of Bonhoeffer that was written about, I don't know, I think 5 years ago or so, by an author named Eric Metexas, who is a very politically outspoken figure, and he's definitely I would say, a partaker in the culture wars. And I think it might be good to start with him because I think, and thankfully, people are realizing more that this movie isn't based on that book, and it doesn't really have a connection with that book, other than the fact that the movie and the book are both about the same guy, Bonhoeffer. The director of this film has said, "Look, like, anyone can come interview me. Not a lot of people have gone to actually talk with him about this movie, but he's like, this movie is not based on that book, so that's just unfounded." Um, but I think it might be. But even with that, even with Metaxas and his Bonhoeffer book, um, I think labeling even him, Eric Metaxas, as Christian nationalist is overblown. It I haven't read his book on Bonhoeffer. I don't really intend to. I know many who have, and I know many who have and who found it a helpful introduction. And it's people I know who are not, who are smart, who are educated. Some are my parishioners, some are not. Um, they're, they have advanced degrees, maybe not in theology, but whatever. It's they're able to detect if they're being, like, led along by some, agenda, or these are decent, smart people, who consider it, and who thought it was a very enjoyable biography, that kind of like this movie, they found it very inspiring for them and introduce them to someone like Bonhoeffer. Now, perhaps perhaps for better or for worse, I think the book was an accessible entry point. Um, I've not read it myself. I don't intend to. I have read a lot of Metaxas's book on Martin Luther. That's also probably the most. It's in the top two or three books about Luther out for the last few years. Is he wrote a biography on Luther as well. I have read most of that. It's not in my top recommendation. I mean, anyone who's listened to this podcast knows we've had some serious people who've written some stuff on Luther, and it's Metaxas' work just doesn't compare in that realm. But I wouldn't call Metexas' Luther book. I wouldn't call it egregious, and nor did I sense him like kind of subtly kind of injecting any partisanship into like any things modern party politics into it. I just didn't get that sense from what I've read. I've read a lot of it, but I haven't read the whole thing. I did get how I could definitely tell this was like a modern evangelical's take on the father of the Reformation. I mean, that's a fair criticism, and in that he's not going to understand Luther, especially as someone who came forth to write a book about him, who was doing research for the first time. He doesn't get Luther on some points, and I think I'll totally grant that critique of Metaxas's Luther book. I do think he did a good job with some of the nuances involved in the Luther versus Zwingli debate on the Holy Eucharist. I thought Metaxas actually, kind of understood that pretty well. And I thought it was overall well researched. Was he diving into all the scholarly stuff out there on Luther? No, he read a lot of secondary works and he read and I believe he dove into a lot of Luther's works. And so it was well in that sense. I thought it was well researched, especially for a popular biography. I thought it met that test. So it wouldn't be my top recommendation for a Luther book. I mean, but that said, it was decent for what it was. But I think labeling is, and again, I didn't find his Luther book to be doing anything like. I didn't find it to be a political manifesto expressing his using Luther. I didn't see him as using Luther for his own as his puppet for his own political outspokenness. And I think even labeling Metaxas is overblown. As a Christian nationalist, I think is overblown. Metaxas has written a book called Letters to the American Church. Kind of a play on Paul. Like Paul wrote a letter to the Ephesian, Church of Ephesus. Paul wrote a letter to the Church of Corinth, and Metaxas wrote a book called A Letter to the American Church. And that is, I think, a bit more of a political manifesto. I think that in that sense, it's a very short volume, and he draws upon like a little bit from Bonhoeffer, a little bit from Luther, a little bit from Wilberforce in there, to kind of cherry picking things from them to kind of weave into his own call, Metaxas' own call to the church to stand the line on some things. And I definitely thought it was, that was an ideologically driven book. That was a book written by someone who's a Christian and a social conservative, and he decried a lot of what I guess has been pejoratively labeled as wokeness. But I'll revisit that because I think I have a lot of sympathies with someone critiquing that kind of thing. But that said, I didn't think the book. It came off to me. Yeah, I could tell a conservative Christian wrote it, but it didn't come off to me as Christian nationalist. Because when I think of Christian nationalism, I think of like a very far right, anti-pluralism, as in like, I think of it as an anti-pluralistic theocracy. That is where there is no separation of church and state. And Metaxas repeatedly calls for and upholds a separation of church and state, and says this was the problem with the Bonhoeffer situation, because Bonhoeffer was facing a situation where those realms where the church was compromised because of the state, Um, so, I don't see, I can't call him a Texas. I honestly, from what I've read, call him a theocrat based on he's actually the opposite of that. But a theocracy would be where like a religious figures and figures from a particular religious tradition have a monopoly on the government and the laws that it makes, and that one religion is officially endorsed over another. And of course, our country was founded with freedom of religion. I don't believe that means that Christians need to stay behind closed doors and not have any voice in the public square, though. Sometimes I think that's what the secularists, or more radical secularists, will interpret freedom of religion to be. Um, but but yeah, I didn't see Metaxas's work as right wing, anti pluralistic theocracy. I saw it as kind of a conservative Christian. I didn't. I felt I had a lot of sympathies with him on that front in this letter to the American Church book. I do think that what's he he was critiquing what I think something we were starting to see in the later 2010s, early 2020s, some of the the excesses of the cultural left, or the some of the excesses of the intersectional left that started to have some very authoritarian tendencies, which I've seen. I honestly feel like, thankfully, the pendulum's been swinging away from that kind of since 2021, 2022 is kind of peak woke, as people call it. And frankly, I'm just kind of tired of hearing it, because now we have a whole anti-woke industry and a woke industry, and it's just like we just have this silly culture wars that I think most average people walking around in this country of the United States and in the world are just not, they're not worrying about on a day-to-day basis. So, but that said, I will say that Metaxas is definitely a partaker in that fight. And I think I have a lot of sympathies with him in him being against authoritarianism and he's definitely against authoritarianism of a certain variety. I wouldn't be as quick as him to draw parallels between what the things he criticizes in that work, in this letter to the American Church book, and I wouldn't be so quick as him to draw parallels between that and Nazi Germany. I don't, I just think that's not well founded, but certainly authoritarianism can creep up on any side of the political aisle, the political spectrum, and anything that tries to dominate the conversation and make people feel like they have to self-censor, or things that outright just censor. I mean, those are serious. Those are all part of what I unfortunately think are kind of a more knee-jerk society that we tend to live in. But it's always kind of the loud few. It's never, most people. But anyways, I digress. That was kind of, we're getting really maybe perhaps too far away from the Bond book. But that said, I just wanted to say all that to say that even I think the criticisms of Metaxas and perhaps his Bonhoeffer book may not even be, even if the movie was based on that, it's not, that's not like, that doesn't end the conversation. And the movie wasn't based on that, by the way, but even if it was, which it wasn't, I don't see how that in itself would just end the discussion and say, no, movie bad, can't see it. So, but now as far as historical inaccuracies of the Bonhoeffer film, like I said, it's there. The movie has them. I think biographical movies should strive for accuracy for the most part, but cinematic licenses are a given. I think movies need to be assessed as creative works in their own right. And even with the liberties taken in this Bonhoeffer movie, like I said, I don't think any of them dishonor Bonhoeffer. And in fact, I think the heart of the matter of the Bonhoeffer affair was not compromised. By that I mean, I think the broad truth about Bonhoeffer as a person and his character, I felt were expressed in this movie. It wasn't able to get completely into his head and heart, and it wasn't, it can't express, the theology is, that you can go to his writings for. But I just don't think criticisms of historical inaccuracies I think they're valid, but they shouldn't overshadow an assessment of a film's overall merit in most cases, unless the inaccuracies are just way too offensive, which I did not think was the case with this movie. I was rather kind of appalled and alarmed that certain people were so quick to be critical of a movie, which I'm just 100%, almost 100% bet they hadn't even seen yet by the time they were, saying it. So, but I will say that I'll get into the criticisms now of the movie. We've already mentioned the Christian nationalism thing, but I do want to now touch on where the accusations come from. Kind of the Christian nationalist accusations kind of stem from what I can tell a couple things. One was an impression some had that there's a group of Bonhoeffer scholars known as the International Bonhoeffer Society. I will put a link to them in the show notes of this episode. I'll put a link to them. They actually have some good resources on there, including a curriculum for parishes, for churches to use for teaching the story of Bonhoeffer to their congregations. I, in fact, will be planning to do that in January because and again, that's the good thing about this movie, because we went to see this movie, this recent movie, and it generated interest in my parishioners who went with me to see this, and they're like, I want to know more. I mean, 3 or 4 of them came up to me and said, like, I want to know more. I want to really dive into the story. Movies are great, but they don't always get to the heart of it. Like, I want to know more. And so we're using this curriculum, which I recommend people to check out from International Bonhoeffer Society. Anyways, I digress. There was this group of scholars, Bonhoeffer scholars. People who are experts, did their dissertations on Bonhoeffer and wrote monographs and works about Bonhoeffer. This group, it was said that this group, along with members of Bonhoeffer's family, wrote a statement condemning this movie, and that they wrote a statement accusing this movie of being Christian nationalist, and that's not what happened. With the littlest bit of research in Google, you'll discover that's not really what happened. The Bonhoeffer Society and these family members released a statement long before this movie came out. It wasn't solely about this movie. Much of it was not. And why don't I just go ahead and read parts of the statement, just so we can, just so we can see what it's about. So, and this statement was, of course, it's called "Stop Misusing Dietrich Bonhoeffer to Support Political Violence and Christian Nationalism." So, and I previously misspoke. This statement's not, from what I could tell, from members of Bonhoeffer's family, but it's made by scholars, academics, some church leaders, from what I can tell. But basically, it talks about the political situation. The U.S. has some criticisms to make of Metexas. I mean, again, a lot of it's geared at Metexas, because it's kind of seeing Metexas. It's saying how he wrote this popular book and on Bonhoeffer, and how most people are encountering Bonhoeffer perhaps because of him and his book, but it also makes note of his activity outside of this book, in things he's done at the National Prayer Breakfast, something he wrote in Wall Street Journal, as well as things he said on his radio show, which I don't listen to. I don't follow Metexas. I don't know much about it. Maybe I should. Maybe I should see. Maybe I'll see where more of this idea of him being like a theocrat may come from. I don't know, but but the statement's addressing Metaxas in that book, and not approving of this Metexas, just kind of his pet political projects and what he does, and saying that he's using Bonhoeffer to invoke his own cause, right? Then it criticizes the Project 2025 from Heritage Foundation. But that's the first two sections. The third section, and it's only a paragraph, and it's the only the only thing in the statement that addresses this movie we're talking about. It mentions that in November, a movie will be released. The movie Bonhoeffer, Pastor, Spy, and Assassin. Again, this was written. None of these people would have been able to see the movie at the time. Some of them may have seen it by now. Maybe they still hold to the same opinion. I don't know. But they're just mentioning this movie was on the horizon, and they mention how Angel Studios. They say, "quote Angel Studios," the producer of the movie, makes the connection to the present explicit in its makes the connection to the present explicit in its advertising, saying the film begs the question, how far will you go to stand up for what's right, unquote. And then they say, quote, in the current highly polarized political climate of the United States, these are dangerous words, underscored by the equally dangerous and patently false poster images of Bonhoeffer carrying a gun. The outcome of the election could be met with an unprecedented wave of violence. Well, thankfully, we haven't seen a lot of violence since the election, thankfully. So they criticized the poster, and I think that's fair. I was kind of surprised in one of the posters, and it's one of the main posters used for the movie. He's holding a gun in his hand, but and the inclusion of the word assassin in the subtitle, I think, was not tasteful as well. According to, I guess that was a marketing. That wasn't. It was kind of the studio more than the director. I don't know. I'd have to fact check that. That was kind of second, third hand things I heard from reading some things. But yeah, I would have not wanted to, if I were the maker of this movie, I would not have done those two moves. And I thought it was interesting though, because he never, I watched the whole movie. From what I could see, he never had a gun at all in the movie. So I wonder why have that on the poster. In fact, it shows him very much going. He's kind of resisting through mouth and action, not violent action though, in the movie throughout. So yeah, I don't. And again, I know sometimes being a U.S. citizen here, there is definitely, unfortunately, a lot of polarization. I do wonder though if a lot of these signers who are not in the United States may have a different take on what that polarization looks like on a day-to-day basis here, because they're not here kind of living the day-to-day like most of us are too. And again, maybe I should be careful even saying that, but I can't help but wonder if how accurate of a picture some people overseas may have of our country. And then that last part of the last part of that paragraph that mentioned the movie, and then it moves on and the movie never comes up again, is that any attempt to invoke Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his resistance against Hitler as a reason to engage in political violence in our contemporary context must be strongly opposed. Moreover, while Bonhoeffer supported the coup, he refused to offer a Christian or theological justification for it. Okay, so even there they're saying he was part of, a pretty active resistance to remove someone from power, as I take it. Again, we went back to there's the different interpretations of how directly he was involved with an assassination attempt, properly speaking. I think, I don't have a verdict on that, but I think just that statement alone mentions that, Bonhoeffer rightfully saw this as a very complicated situation that it's kind of hard to have a Christian or theological or ethical justification for, but nevertheless, some type of action needs to be taken to prevent harm and evil. I don't know. I think they're even seeing this. The people in this statement are seeing a big gray area here, which I think is great. So that's the third section. It's not the third paragraph. It's the third point that is made in the statement. That's the only time the movie is ever brought up, and it's not even saying anything, from what I can tell, about the movie. It's saying that this movie they're a little worried about the movie based on a poster they saw and based on the way on some of the aspects it's marketed, and in the near future when it comes out, hopefully it does not elicit some type of like response, and hopefully it isn't carrying the same. Hopefully it's not a Metaxas manifesto, right? And I think as things came to be, I thought the movie didn't preach any of that stuff. So I hope like people were behind this all the movie and were like, okay, it's not doesn't it's not the dangers we feared are not and I think it's important to say that one of the signers of this statement, the Reverend, oh, where's I'm gonna have to do a search. One of the uh, signers of the statement, Reverend Dr. Trip Fuller. He is the host and um, the founder and host of Homebrewed Christianity, which is a podcast. He's one of the signers of this statement. He ended up having the director of Bonhoeffer on his show later, and not to bring him on and be like, to like, berate him or be critical about him or the movie. It was he had him on just to have a conversation to hear him out and to promote the movie. And Trip Fuller, from what I gathered, with some reservations, had an overall positive assessment of the movie. So I know one of the signers already gave the movie a chance. One of the signers of this statement, that by the way was not about the movie. It was in part addressed that this movie was coming out, but it was focused on other things associated with Bonhoeffer, how Bonhoeffer is being generally read or interpreted in the wider culture. So, um, so that's the statement that was put out. It was not a statement of Bonhoeffer scholars, saying this movie was bad, and most of it wasn't even about that movie. I will, on the same website that has the statement, this same Society of Bonhoeffer Scholars, they also put up a statement of the actors in this movie. And here, the actors are expressing in this little abstract that's above their statement, they state that we are distancing, well, this says, quote, they're distancing themselves from possible misuses of the film. And they stand behind the calls from Bonhoeffer scholars, church leaders, and extended members of Bonhoeffer family to stop the distortion of Bonhoeffer's life and legacy to justify Christian nationalism and political violence. Read the statement below, unquote. And that's the little summary. Again, the links in the show notes for this website has that statement as well. It's a statement of the actors. So the very actors that were involved in this were like, whoa, we took part in this movie. We're putting out a statement saying, look, there is no intention of this movie to preach any type of nationalist message or Christian nationalist message or violent message, and anyone who and people can read the statement. Again, maybe people won't take their word, but I just think that at this point, considering this society put up their own statement and put up the statement of the actors of the movie, and that one of the signers of the other statement had the director of the movie on. I don't know if people know all this info, and if people know this info, it's not quite as easy or simple to just jump on a bandwagon and say that this movie is a propaganda movie. It just doesn't fit, I think, with the circumstances surrounding this movie and what it is. And so, a friend of mine, I was having a conversation about this movie with. He said, he said there's a tendency in society for people to take sides on things prematurely and to read nefarious motives into things, putting the worst construction on them. And part of doing that is taking rumors and gossip about it as established fact. And so, that was, my friend said that I thought it was rather insightful, about this. Now, again, the movie's not perfect. I will, if you look up reviews, I did know there was one review that I agreed with parts of it that Myles Werntz wrote for a review for Christianity Today that I'll take a quote from. He says, quote, rather than depicting a man of deep theological convictions and subtle intellect, Bonhoeffer tells the story of a man for whom moral convictions are a flexible and useful tool, a man whose actions are determined not by concern for the church's witness, but by perceived historical necessity. It is the story of a Bonhoeffer willing to do anything, including disavow the teachings of Jesus as he understood them, to assassinate Adolf Hitler, unquote. That part I had a lot of issue with. I know I just said there were parts about the parts I agreed. I'll put a link in the show notes. It's a Christianity Today article called "Bonhoeffer Bears Little Resemblance to Reality," as in the movie bears a little resemblance to reality. The subtitle is "A New Biopic from Angel Studios Twists the Theologian's Life and Thought to Make a Political Point." I later talked with someone who knows this author, who said the author did not choose the title or subtitle, or maybe didn't choose his subtitle, and wouldn't have gone that far to say that he thought the movie was making a political point. So even that, it's like, come on, if that's true, editors need to be, they should be truthful. It's just, it's kind of, because that might not represent what the author was trying to say in what they submitted. I don't know the truth or falsity of that, but again, this information age we live in, maybe it's always been the case. People, I guess, back when, not everyone could get on the internet and say something, even back when you had three, major companies controlling the newspapers and the 3 or 5 major networks, it was easier for misinformation. I don't know, but I digress. But this article from Christianity Today by Myles Werntz is a review with a lot of, overall a kind of a negative review. I agreed with parts of it, but that part I just read I thought was pretty unfair, because I don't think the movie was just a moralistic movie. I felt that the movie recognized the complexity, the nuance, morally and ethically, but also, theologically of how to address this situation of Nazi Germany. And again, the movie, it wasn't until the very end where Bonhoeffer, he is betrayed militantly, but not until the very end. And he's, from what I remember, and it was a very much, he was cast as very much a reluctant militant. And I think, as far as, I don't know if all viewers come away with this impression, but my impression is I came away from the movie with seeing that as just one little part, him being a reluctant militant. I mean, if he was, that's still just one little part from all the other parts of this man's incredible life and story. And I thought the movie showed all those many parts that he went through, including, and I wish the critics would have, the criticizers would have addressed this, but again, my hunch is a lot of them never even saw the movie before they, opened their mouths, is the way the relationship Bonhoeffer has with the Abyssinian Baptist Church in New York, where again he encounters Black Christians, African American Christians, really for the first time. I don't think he came across any in Germany, and he sees the worship of that church as just so enlivening, and how their social message puts in the emphasis and accent on the social the social dimension of the faith was something that was perhaps lacking in his other theological formation back home. That was like really well done. The movie spends a lot of time on this. I had no idea I was going to be spending so much time in Harlem, and in a Baptist church, and in hearing jazz music. I had no idea that was gonna be such a chunk of this movie, but it was. And I'm like, wow, I bet that would have been appreciated by some of these voices that were quick to dismiss the movie. had they seen it, but I don't know. I I personally felt that that was a really moving part of a overall very moving film. So yeah, I recommend the movie. I was alarmed that so many were quick to dismiss it and insist that a society of Bonhoeffer scholars condemned it when they didn't happen. And I will say this: this might get me in trouble because I've had scholars on the show. I highly value scholarship, but I sometimes think they are. I think they're nitpicky sometimes. Sometimes scholars, and it's not just theologians, it's scholars of historical figures can get protective. And I totally understand that. I think they can understandably get protective about subjects that they've devoted so much time into understanding and writing about and contributing in the field of, that they get protective, that they're sometimes intolerant to popular iterations. Um, Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but you know, I understand that. I understand it in cases, and especially in cases where the treatment and rendering of a person to the screen is done in an extremely poor fashion, or it's wildly off. Again, I don't think that applies to this Bonhoeffer movie, but in that sense, I could see where the historians and the scholars are really are good voices that need to keep us in check. But sometimes I also think they can be nitpicky based on that too. And they're not film critics. They're not film critics. But and I can't help but think, but for the people that say, well, it didn't really show his theology too well, it's like, okay, well, I can't help but think because Bonhoeffer's a Lutheran. Let's kind of go into the Lutheran world of film, and let's go into the Luther movie of 2003 with Joseph Fiennes. Overall, good movie. I would give that also a 3.5 out of 5. It's it's a good above average movie, and I enjoy it. But again, 3.5 out of 5 is not bad. That's actually means pretty good. For people like what it should be 4 or 5 stars. It's like yeah, I'm a film snob, and I gotta rate, like I gotta give the star numbers that they do. But anyways, I digress. Look at the 2003 film Luther. Overall, good movie. Did it get into the theologies of law and gospel, two kingdoms teaching, theology of the cross and theology of glory, nuances of all these theological distinctions? No, it did not. And a movie is a very challenging medium to try to put that all into. A lot of most of you, pretty much any viewer, would come away from the Luther movie with little to no idea about what a theology of the cross is versus the theology of glory, um, which were similar principles that drove Bonhoeffer because he's a Lutheran. Um, does that mean the movie was bad? Does that mean the movie didn't convey, kind of this broader truth about Luther? No, it doesn't. It means the movie could very well have done that, and it doesn't mean it wasn't a good biographical treatment, and it certainly doesn't mean it wasn't a good entry point to Luther. Movies have their time. Movies can only do so much, arguably, and they can do things like get people interested, and I think that's all good stuff. So that's my thoughts on overall. Again, I'll put the links in the show notes to people. Recommend people check out the interview with the director of the movie Bonhoeffer. What is his name? I'm gonna look it up. I apologize, Todd Komarnicki. I'm so sorry if I just butchered that that name. He came on for over an hour long interview on the podcast Homebrewed Christianity by one of the signers that statement who warned against bad portrayals of Bonhoeffer. And they had a great, it was a very just, very touching interview, very emotional at parts. I mean, they really just brought out the importance and just the incredible, witness that Bonhoeffer was as a person in their conversation. And that's the podcast, Homebrewed Christianity. Trip Fuller's a very rather progressive-minded Christian, and he talked to the director, and he he would be the first to be against any type of Christian nationalist message put out by a movie, and he didn't see that put out in this movie, from what I could overall gather. And so I encourage people to listen to that conversation on that podcast. Check out the statement by the scholars on the International Bonhoeffer site. Check out their resources. Check out ways they can maybe serve if you're a church leader, or teach things in your church, or want to do it on your own. There's curriculum on there to learn about Bonhoeffer from the experts. I encourage people to see the movie Bonhoeffer, to form your own opinions about the movie Bonhoeffer. And I encourage everyone to never make just quick judgments about something, especially without even seeing it. And always, if you hear so and so said this about so and so, just do a fact check. It may be accurate. It may be partially accurate. It may be totally inaccurate. But we need to be about truth and be truthful, and always find the truth. And I think the truth is, even in the in a confusing age, we can come to find and know the truth, and so just do that. Again, I'll put the links in the show notes to these statements. Also, the statement from the actors, which is also hosted at the International Bonhoeffer Society site, which I don't think again, the group that I don't think is actually against this movie per se. And I recommend people to see the movie. Good movie. And look forward to having y'all return to listen to me. I'll turn people off. They'll never listen to me again, because they're that insistent that this movie is just absolutely no good. I'm sorry if you feel that way, but I just pray and encourage people to understand that things were made out about, like this movie, that I thought were unfair. And I thought some clarity needed to be brought to it. I'm not like I'm not the one who discovered all this. But it was just kind of my synthesis of seeing kind of some back and forth about it, and wanted just to put it on my show, because this is a show about church history for one, Reformational heritage for another. Bonhoeffer very much stands as a very important, towering figure in both of those worlds. I'm ashamed to say, and again, I'm happy to say I'm reading more about him and from him because of this movie. So that's a good thing about the movie. And also that I think this, I would love to have maybe guests talk about Bonhoeffer in the future on the show. Maybe do a couple episodes where James and I pour into one of his writings or something. That may be on the horizon, maybe not. But he's an important figure in church history, in Lutheranism, in history in general. I mean, this is not, this is talking about Hitler, World War II, such things that have shaped the very world we live in. And in many ways, Bonhoeffer, in ways we may not even realize, have shaped the world, I would say, that we live in. And so I encourage you, read the movie, listen to some of the things I've recommended on here, read some of the things I've recommended on here. And if you want, like me, read the biography of him, I really recommend the Charles Marsh one. And God bless.